Thanksgiving night was supposed to be warm laughter, family forgiveness. Instead, my father's voice cut through the dining room like a blade. "Get out of this house," he shouted, his fist slamming the table so hard the cranberry sauce bled across the white linen. "Paying the bills doesn't make you family." My mother leaned in, her perfume sharp, her whisper colder than the November air. "You're just jealous of your sister." The entire room fell silent. Aunts, uncles, cousins frozen mid-bite, waiting for my reaction. I laughed, slow and bitter. "Then let her pay the $12,800. The number hung in the air like smoke. My sister's smile faltered. My father's face turned crimson. And just like that, the family I had carried for a decade snapped in two. By the next morning, there would be cops at their door, 67 missed calls on my phone, and a silence that finally set me free. But before I tell you how everything collapsed, let me take you back to where it began. The smell of roasted turkey and buttered rolls should have felt comforting, but it made my stomach twist. I sat at one end of the table in my parents' house in Grand Rapids, watching the flicker of the candles dance against their fine china. Every detail of the evening was meant to look perfect: Mom's lace tablecloth, the wreaths she hung from every window, the silver cutlery polished until it shone. On the outside, we were the kind of family people envied. On the inside, we were rotting from the core. My sister Rachel sat across from me, her hair styled in soft curls, her voice cutting through the low hum of conversation. She was telling everyone about her new wellness startup, some vague plan that, according to her, was going to revolutionize the self-care industry. My parents hung on her every word, eyes wide, smiles proud. I'd heard this story before, different idea, same dream. The boutique that went bankrupt, the podcast that fizzled, the cryptocurrency scheme that swallowed their savings. Each time she failed, they called her resilient. Each time I succeeded, they called me lucky. When Rachel announced she might need a little seed money to get things going, Dad chuckled and reached for his wine. "We'll figure something out," he said, as if the family fortune was a bottomless well. Mom nodded eagerly, already suggesting names for her brand. I watched the two of them and felt that old familiar ache in my chest, the one that came from realizing I'd never be the golden child no matter how much I gave. My best friend Lauren once said, "Family loyalty can become emotional abuse when it's one-sided." Sitting there listening to them praise Rachel's next disaster, I understood exactly what she meant. For 10 years, I had been the one paying the mortgage, the car loans, the utilities, all while they spoke about Rachel like she was saving the world. I did it quietly, believing that love meant sacrifice. But love, I learned, was a language my family never truly spoke. "Emily," my mother said, suddenly breaking through my thoughts, "how's work?" Her tone was casual, but her eyes were sharp, assessing. "It's good," I replied, forcing a smile. "We just finished a big project at the firm. My team did well." Rachel laughed softly, swirling her wine. "Still sitting behind that computer all day. You should try something exciting for once. Take a risk." "A risk?" I asked. "Like the boutique or the podcast." Her smile stiffened. "At least I'm trying to make something of myself. You just hide behind your job." Before I could answer, Dad's hand hit the table, rattling the plates. "Enough. Don't ruin Thanksgiving with your bitterness, Emily. You always turn everything into a fight." I felt my face burn, the weight of every eye at the table pressing against me. "I'm not fighting," I said quietly. "I'm just tired of pretending this family runs on love when it actually runs on my paycheck." A murmur spread through the table. Aunt June looked down. Uncle Tom shifted uncomfortably. Rachel rolled her eyes, her voice dripping with false pity. "You're so dramatic. Nobody asked you to pay for anything." My chest tightened. "Really? The mortgage I've been covering every month since Dad's layoff? The car payments, the utilities? The credit cards in my name?" Dad's face hardened. "You think that makes you better than us?" "No," I said, my voice trembling. "I think it makes me tired." The room went still, the only sound the ticking clock on the mantel. Then Dad's words came, each one like a blow. "Get out of this house. Paying bills doesn't make you family. Mom leaned forward, her lips curving into a small, cold smile. You're just jealous of your sister. Something inside me snapped. The years of silence, of smiling, through humiliation of writing checks to keep their lights on it all, rose to the surface at once. I laughed. It wasn't the kind of laugh that came from humor. It was the kind that comes when the truth finally cuts deep enough to bleed. Then, let her pay the $12,800. Rachel's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Mom blinked. Dad's jaw tightened. What are you talking about? The total I've spent this year alone keeping this family afloat, I said evenly. The house, the cars, the insurance, the phone plans, every last thing you've taken for granted. But you're right. Money doesn't make family. Maybe I needed to hear that from you. I stood my chair, scraping the hardwood. Nobody moved. Even the candles seemed to flicker in hesitation. I reached for my coat hanging by the door, my hands trembling not from fear but from release. Emily, sit down, Mom ordered. Her tone was the same one she used when I was a child caught crying too loud. I turned to face her, feeling the strength I hadn't known I still had. No, Mom, you've made your choice. So have I. I stepped out into the cold Michigan night, the air sharp against my skin. The laughter from the dining room faded behind me, replaced by the crunch of my boots against the snow. My breath came out in small clouds, each one carrying a piece of the weight I'd been holding for years. When I reached my car, I looked back once through the frosted window. Inside, I could still see them, my father red-faced with anger, my mother whispering furiously, Rachel pretending to cry. It was the same performance they'd been perfecting all my life. Only this time I wasn't in the audience anymore. As I drove away, the radio played soft holiday music. It sounded cruelly ironic, like the world was mocking me. My vision blurred with tears, but I didn't stop. The highway stretched ahead, empty and silver under the moonlight. For the first time, I had no destination, no home to return to. Only the echo of my father's voice and my own words replaying in my head. Then let her pay the $12,800. I whispered it once more, quieter this time, almost as if testing its power. For years I'd believed silence was strength, that swallowing pain was love. But now that silence had shattered, and I was left standing in the aftermath, unsure if I felt broken or free. Snow began to fall heavier, blanketing the road. I slowed, headlights cutting through the white blur. Somewhere between Grand Rapids and the city, I pulled over to the shoulder, turned off the engine, and let the cold seep into the car. My hands shook as I reached for the steering wheel, gripping it like a lifeline. How did it get this far? I whispered into the dark. The answer was simple and cruel. It had always been this way. The lights from my parents' neighborhood still glowed faintly in the distance, twinkling red and gold. From the outside, the Blake house looked warm, festive, full of love. But I knew the truth. It was hollow, built on years of manipulation, favoritism, and guilt. I closed my eyes and let the silence surround me. For the first time in years, there were no voices demanding more, no texts asking for help, no weight on my chest pressing me to give again. There was only the sound of my own breath, steady and alive. That night, I didn't go home. I drove until the gaslight blinked on and parked in front of an old rest stop. I leaned my head back against the seat, staring at the frost forming along the windshield. Somewhere deep down beneath the ache was the faintest spark of something I hadn't felt in years: peace. The house behind me still glowed with Christmas lights. From the outside, it looked perfect. Inside, it had already begun to rot. It didn't start with money. It started with a pink bicycle. When I close my eyes, I can still see the sunlight bouncing off the chrome handlebars, ribbons fluttering from the grips, the way Rachel's laughter echoed down the street as she wobbled on the pavement in front of our house. I was 8 that summer, old enough to know that magic didn't just appear, it was bought. And that kind of magic never seemed to have my name on it. Our house in Midland, Michigan was small and square, the kind that looked cozy from the sidewalk but felt cramped inside. The blue paint had faded to gray, and the porch steps sagged just enough to creak every time you came home. Dad worked long shifts at the auto plant, his uniform permanently stained with oil and sweat. Mom was the receptionist at Dr. Albright's dental office downtown, always coming home with a tight smile and tired eyes. From the outside, we were an ordinary working family, but inside that house, fairness was something only one of us could afford. Rachel was 2 years younger, a bundle of energy and charm. She had curls that bounced when she laughed and a way of tilting her head that made everyone melt. When she scraped her knees, Dad carried her inside like she was made of glass. When I fell off my bike, he told me to walk it off. Mom used to say Rachel was sensitive and needed encouragement while I was the strong one. I didn't realize back then that strong was just another word for ignored. I remember one Christmas more vividly than all the others. Rachel had barely passed her grade that year, C's across the board, but under the tree sat the bright pink bicycle she'd been asking for since summer. The basket had little white daisies woven through it, and when she squealed with delight, Mom clapped her hands like it was the proudest moment of her life. Dad crouched down to tighten the seat, grinning as though he'd given her the world. I stood a few feet away, clutching my straight-A report card. My gift was a sweater 2 sizes too big and a pat on the shoulder. "Keep it up, kiddo," Dad said. That was the year I started keeping my voice quiet and my achievements quieter. When you learn that praise belongs to someone else, you stop reaching for it. At dinner, the conversation always orbited around Rachel. Her new friends, her art, projects her dreams of becoming a singer. When I tried to talk about the spelling bee or the science fair, Mom would smile thinly and say, "That's wonderful, honey," before turning to Rachel. "Sweetheart, sing that song you learned in choir." And Rachel would sing, and everyone would beam. I learned that silence kept the peace, and peace was the closest thing to love we had. As we got older, the pattern carved itself deeper. I became the helper. I folded laundry, did dishes, cleaned the bathroom on weekends without being asked. When Mom's back hurt, I brushed Rachel's hair before bed, listening to her complain about boys and homework while Mom watched TV. Dad would walk past the doorway, give Rachel a thumbs up, and tell me I was a good big sister. The words felt more like orders than compliments. The unfairness wasn't loud, it was subtle, like a draft sneaking under a closed door. One afternoon after school, I came home with a certificate for placing first in the regional spelling bee. I found Mom in the kitchen frosting cupcakes. "That's wonderful, honey," she said, barely glancing at the ribbon. "Now could you take these to your sister's class? They're celebrating her art contest entry." Rachel hadn't even won, but she got cupcakes and applause. I got a ride to her school holding a tray that smelled like sugar and disappointment. I don't think Dad ever meant to make me feel invisible. He just didn't see the difference. Rachel's laughter filled the house. Mine stayed folded inside my notebooks. When she ran to him with a scraped elbow, he'd scoop her up. When I came home crying because a teacher accused me of cheating, he told me to toughen up. "You're stronger than that," he said. I believed him. There was a night when the truth of it settled deep enough to stay forever. I was 10. Rachel had brought home a math worksheet covered in red marks. 60%. She was on the verge of tears. Mom sat beside her cooing, "You did your best, baby. Let's go get ice cream." That same week, I'd won a district essay competition. The ribbon was still in my backpack, folded neatly. No one asked about it, and I didn't offer. That night, I lay in bed, listening to the ceiling fan spin lazily above me. The air was thick with the smell of detergent from laundry I'd helped fold earlier. I thought about Rachel's smile smeared with ice cream, about Mom's proud hand on her shoulder. I wondered if maybe love had a price I couldn't pay. As the years passed, my place in the family hardened into something predictable. Rachel, the golden daughter, could do no wrong. I, the reliable one, couldn't afford to. If she forgot to do chores, I picked up the slack. If she failed a class, I tutored her. When she broke curfew, I covered for her. Mom and Dad never had to ask. I just did it. They called it helping out. I called it surviving. In middle school, Rachel joined cheerleading. Suddenly, weekends revolved around her practice schedules and competitions. Dad cheered louder than anyone in the bleachers, even when her team came in last. I remember standing beside him once, clutching my backpack after a debate tournament I'd won that same day. He ruffled my hair absently, eyes never leaving Rachel. "Look at her go," he said proudly. I looked too and realized he'd never looked at me that way. By high school, I'd stopped trying to compete. I buried myself in books, part-time jobs, scholarships, anything that could get me out of Midland. Rachel still floated through, smiling, loved, and endlessly forgiven. When she crashed Mom's car at 16, Dad said, "It's just a mistake." When I got a B+ in calculus, he asked what went wrong. The final confirmation came the night before I left for college. My suitcase was packed, every corner of my small room cleared. Mom stood in the doorway, her eyes already misty. "You'll do great," she said. "Don't forget to call." Then she added, almost as an afterthought, "Your sister's going to miss you. You know she depends on you." Rachel appeared behind her, holding my favorite sweater. "You can't take this," she said, smiling. "It looks better on me." Mom laughed softly, as if it were a sweet joke between sisters. I let the sweater go. When Dad drove me to the bus station the next morning, the sky was a pale pink, the color of quiet beginnings. He handed me a small envelope with $20 inside. "For emergencies," he said. Then, after a pause, "Keep an eye on your sister, even from afar. You know how she is." I smiled because it was easier than crying. "Yeah," I said. "I know." As the bus pulled away, I pressed my forehead against the window and watched them shrink in the distance, Mom waving, Rachel yawning, Dad already turning back toward the car. I should have felt free. But instead, a strange heaviness settled in my chest. It wasn't that I didn't love them. I did. But love, I was starting to understand, wasn't supposed to feel like a job. The road stretched ahead of me, gray and endless, cutting through the frozen Michigan fields. The sky looked wider than it ever had before, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure if that was comforting or terrifying. I whispered to myself, "When I come back, things will be different." But I was wrong. Distance doesn't erase the lines drawn in childhood. It just gives you a better view of them. When I left home, I thought I was walking toward freedom. I didn't know I was carrying their weight with me. And no matter how far I ran, I could still hear the faint squeak of that pink bicycle rolling through every choice I would make. The call came just after midnight. I was halfway through a stack of notes for an upcoming exam when my phone buzzed against the edge of my desk. Mom's name flashed on the screen. For a second, I thought it was a mistake. She never called that late. When I answered, her voice was trembling. "Your dad lost his job, Emily. They let him go today. 20 years, and they just..." She stopped, her breath catching. "He doesn't want to talk right now." The silence that followed was so heavy, it made the walls hum. I promised I'd come home that weekend. When I arrived, the house felt smaller, dimmer than I remembered. The living room light was off, only the glow from the TV spilling across Dad's face as he sat in his recliner, eyes unfocused. Mom was at the kitchen table sorting through a pile of envelopes, her hands shaking slightly. "They cut his whole department," she whispered, as if speaking too loud might make it worse. After all those years, Dad didn't look up. His uniform still hung on the back of the chair near the door, creased and clean from the last shift he'd worked. The sound of the furnace clicking on filled the silence. For a long time, no one spoke. That weekend, I noticed how the air in the house had changed. It used to smell like coffee and laundry detergent. Now it smelled faintly of worry. The walls seemed thinner, every whispered argument leaking into my old bedroom. Late at night, I heard them talking about bills, insurance, the mortgage. "We'll figure something out," Mom said, once her voice cracking. But they didn't. Dad started sleeping in late, staying in the garage, most days tinkering with the car. Mom's paychecks were small, barely covering groceries. By the time I went back to campus, the stack of overdue notices had doubled. 2 weeks later, she called again. It's just the electric bill this time, she said quickly before I could ask how they were doing. We'll pay you back next month. I was working part-time at the library for $9 an hour. My rent was late, my textbooks still on credit. But I said yes. I sent $200 that night. When Mom called me her lifesaver, something in me ached with pride and guilt all at once. It wasn't the last call. The next month it was the car insurance, then the water bill, then Dad's medication. Every request came wrapped in the same phrases. You're so good with money. You've always been responsible. We don't want to burden you. By the end of that semester, I wasn't just helping, I was managing their survival. I told myself it was temporary. That's what you do for family. But temporary has a way of becoming permanent when you're the only one willing to sacrifice. My life became a rhythm of work, study, send. Work, study, send. While my friends went to parties or talked about spring break plans, I was counting dollars and waiting for my paycheck to clear. My laptop background was a photo of my family, all of us smiling at Rachel's high school graduation. Some nights I stared at it until the image blurred. Rachel was still in high school, still shining in every direction I wasn't. She joined cheerleading, dated a senior, came home late. When Dad couldn't afford new tires for the car, Mom said, "We'll make it work." Rachel can't miss practice. They did make it work because I sent money for it. At first it felt good to be needed. It gave me a sense of purpose. "You're our rock," Mom said once. I started to believe that being useful was the same as being loved. Then, the tone changed. By my senior year, the calls came less like requests and more like instructions. "Mortgage is due Friday. Can you handle it, Mom?" Would say as if I were the accountant in charge of their life. When I hesitated, she'd sigh. "You're the only one we can rely on, Emily. You've always been the responsible one." I wanted to argue to tell her I was drowning too, but I never did. I'd hear Dad muttering in the background about how things used to be easier, and guilt would squeeze the air from my lungs. I always said yes. Sometimes when I closed my eyes, I heard Rachel's laughter echoing through that house, the clink of her spoon in the cereal bowl. I'd watch the sound of Mom telling her how proud she was. Those memories blended with the buzz of my phone with each new message asking for help. There was a day when I nearly broke. I had just finished a double shift at the library, followed by 3 hours tutoring high schoolers in algebra. My hands smelled like printer ink and exhaustion. When I got home, there was a voicemail waiting. "Hey, honey," Mom's voice chirped. "The gas company called again. They said they'll cut service by tomorrow if we don't pay. You know how cold your father gets at night." I stared at my balance, $83 in checking. I transferred $75 anyway. I didn't buy groceries that week. One of my friends, Kara, noticed I was losing weight. "Are you okay?" she asked. I laughed it off. "Just busy." I didn't tell her I was living on instant noodles so my parents could keep the lights on. The next month, Dad called me for the first time since losing his job. His voice was sharp, almost defensive. "Your mother said you were short this month. What's going on?" "You're working full-time, right?" "I'm a student, Dad. I work part-time." "Well, maybe you should pick up more shifts. You're young, you can handle it." That line hit harder than he realized. It was the same one I'd grown up hearing. You can handle it. I graduated 2 years later. My cap and gown felt heavy, not from pride, but from everything I carried that no one could see. Mom and Dad came to the ceremony, Rachel too. She was on her phone most of the time, snapping pictures of herself in the stands. Afterward, we went to dinner at a cheap family restaurant off the highway. Dad raised his glass of iced tea. "We're proud of you, kiddo. You'll make good money now." I smiled, but inside something cracked. When the bill came, Mom looked at me expectantly. "You've got this right." Of course I did. I started my first job at a tech firm in Detroit 3 months later. My paycheck felt like freedom until the first email from Mom arrived. "Congratulations, sweetheart. We're so proud of you. Could you help us catch up on the mortgage this month? We'll pay you back once Dad's back on his feet." Dad wasn't getting back on his feet. He'd stopped trying. Rachel was in community college posting pictures of brunches and shopping trips, all financed by family support. I didn't realize until much later that I was the family support. Each time I transferred money, I told myself it was love, that it made me a good daughter, but the truth was simpler. It made me obedient. It kept the peace. It kept me small. By the time I turned 24, the pattern was set in stone. I paid their mortgage $800 a month, utilities $400, car payment $600, insurance, phones, and emergencies another few hundred. When I looked at my bank statements, I saw my own life shrinking to make room for theirs. One night, Kara came over with takeout. She opened my fridge, found only bottled water and expired yogurt. "Emily," she said, "you're paying their bills, aren't you?" I froze. "They need me." "No," she said softly, "they're using you." I laughed, but it sounded hollow. "They're my parents." She shook her head. "There's a difference between helping and being held hostage." After she left, I sat on the floor beside my laptop, scrolling through my bank app, tracing every payment. The numbers blurred. Rent, electric, tuition, loans, their mortgage. My life reduced to columns and withdrawals. That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I remembered being 10 years old, lying under the slow spin of that same ceiling fan in Midland, wondering why my best was never enough. It wasn't just a childhood lesson, it had become my life. The next morning, Mom called again. "Sweetheart, your father's truck broke down. It'll cost about $800 to fix. You don't want him walking to interviews, do you?" I said yes, before I could stop myself. After the call, I sat staring at my reflection in the dark screen of my laptop. My face looked older than 24, hollow in the eyes. I whispered to the empty room, "I can handle it." But the truth was, I couldn't. That night I realized something no one had ever said out loud in our family: love wasn't unconditional, it was transactional. When I closed my eyes, I could still see that pink bicycle glinting in the sunlight, Rachel's laughter echoing down the street. I finally understood I had been pedaling for everyone else ever since. Independence lasted exactly 3 days. When I got my first real job in Detroit, I thought I'd finally stepped out of the shadow of that old blue house. My apartment was small but clean, 1 bedroom with a window that faced the streetlights. I remember sitting on the floor with a cheap bottle of champagne, watching the city through the blinds, and thinking, this is it. Freedom. 3 days later, my phone rang. Mom's voice was warm and sweet, the kind she used when she wanted something. "We're so proud of you, honey. Your father's been telling everyone at church about your new position." She laughed lightly, then her tone softened. "By the way, the mortgage payment's due and it's been a rough month with the utilities. We'll pay you back soon." I didn't even hesitate. "Of course," I said. "I'll take care of it." That's how it always began, with a little praise before the request. The first year in Detroit was a blur of work and deposits. I made spreadsheets to track the bills: mortgage, water, gas, internet, the car payment. My paycheck went straight from my account to theirs. At first, it made me feel responsible, useful, like I was doing something that mattered. But as months turned into years, I noticed the pattern. Every time I made progress, every time I started saving, they needed something else: a roof repair, medical bills, taxes. "It's just this," once Mom would say. "You're such a blessing, Emily." A blessing. That word started to feel heavy, like a chain made of kindness. Rachel was living a completely different story. After her half-hearted attempt at community college, she decided to find herself. Her latest idea was an online boutique, something she said would empower women through sustainable fashion. Mom thought it was brilliant. Dad bragged about her entrepreneurial spirit. They even took out a small loan to help her get started. The boutique lasted 4 months. When it failed, she shrugged and said, "At least I tried." They called her brave. When I brought up my concerns about the debt, Mom said gently, "Your sister just needs a little time. She's the creative type. You were always the practical one." That sentence stayed in my head for weeks. One Saturday, I drove back to Grand Rapids with groceries and envelopes of cash. The house looked older, the siding peeling near the porch. Inside, it smelled like lemon cleaner and tension. Dad was in his recliner watching football. Mom was in the kitchen apron on humming like the perfect hostess. "Look who's here," she said, smiling tightly when I walked in. "You didn't have to bring all that." "I wanted to help," I said. Rachel appeared a few minutes later, twirling a new leather jacket over her shoulders. "Guess what? I found it on sale." She turned in front of Dad, who laughed and said, "That's my girl." They didn't notice the circles under my eyes or the grocery bags cutting into my hands. Over dinner, Mom asked, "How's work?" "Good," I said cautiously. "We just wrapped a big project. My manager hinted at a promotion next quarter." She nodded absently. "That's wonderful. Speaking of which, tax season's coming up. Do you think you could help us with the property bill this year? It's just temporary." I stared at my plate, the mashed potatoes blurring. "Yeah," I said softly. "I can help." After dinner, as I washed the dishes, I heard Dad and Rachel laughing in the living room. Rachel was talking about starting a podcast. "It's going to be huge," she said. "Everyone's into wellness now." Mom joined in, telling her she should quit her part-time job to focus on it. No one asked how my project went. No one asked how I was. Driving back to Detroit that night, I kept the radio off. The silence was thick and familiar. I thought about the check I'd left on the counter, folded neatly under the salt shaker. $800. Just enough to keep their lights on. The following week, I met Lauren for wine at a small bar near my apartment. She was the only person I trusted enough to tell the truth to. "I feel like I'm living two lives," I said, swirling the last sip in my glass. "At work, I'm respected. At home, I'm still the kid who pays for everything and gets told to be grateful." Lauren leaned forward, her brown eyes sharp and kind. "You're not helping them, Em. You're enabling them." I frowned. "They're my parents." "There's a difference between helping and being used," she said. "You don't owe them your future." I wanted to argue, but I couldn't find the words. She was right. Every dollar I sent home was a piece of my own life I'd postponed. That night I went home and opened my bank app. Line after line of transfers scrolled down the screen. Mortgage, utilities, insurance, car. My own rent payment looked small and insignificant beside them. $30,000 a year. 8 years. Nearly $250,000 gone. I sat there staring at the total, heart pounding. That money could have been a down payment on a house, a savings fund, a trip abroad, a life. Instead, it had evaporated into someone else's comfort. The next day, I called Mom, determined to draw a line. "Hey," I started carefully. "I need to talk about the payments. I can't keep." Before I could finish, she sighed, exasperated. "Oh, Emily, don't start. You know how your father gets when the bills pile up. You're the only one we can rely on." "I'm trying to build something for myself too," I said. "I know, sweetheart," she replied in that soft, patronizing tone. "You're just so good at balancing everything. You're strong. Rachel's not like you. She needs more support." I hung up, feeling smaller than when I'd started. Weeks passed in the same rhythm. Work, send, sleep, smile, repeat. The promotions came, but the relief never did. Every success I had turned into a new excuse for them to ask for more. Sometimes late at night, I'd scroll through Rachel's Instagram. Pictures of brunches, road trips, weekend getaways. Under each one, Mom commented with hearts and emojis. "So proud of you, baby." I didn't get hearts. I got receipts. One Friday, my boss stopped by my desk after a long week. "You've been doing incredible work, Emily," he said. "We're lucky to have you." For a moment, I felt light, seen. Then my phone buzzed. "Mom, the car loan's overdue again. Please send it before the weekend." The warmth in my chest vanished. That weekend, Lauren came over with takeout and a bottle of wine. I told her everything. How I couldn't remember the last time my parents said thank you. How every call started with a need. She listened quietly, then said, "You've spent your whole life earning their love. You already paid for it. Stop letting them charge interest." Her words landed like a punch and a prayer at the same time. After she left, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the dark window. The city outside was alive, neon lights, cars, laughter. I felt like a ghost watching life happen to other people. I opened my notebook and wrote a single line. You can't buy love with sacrifice. It looked too simple to be true, but maybe simplicity was what I'd been missing. The next morning I called the bank and set up automatic transfers, this time to my own savings account. It wasn't much, but it was a start, a secret promise to myself. Still, the cycle didn't stop. The guilt didn't fade overnight. Every time Mom called, I picked up. Every time Dad grumbled about the bills, I paid them. But something inside me had shifted. I'd stopped believing their need was my fault. I was starting to see the truth. I wasn't a blessing. I was a resource. And even resources run out. That night, as I turned off the lights in my apartment, I whispered into the darkness, "You can handle it." The words no longer sounded like comfort. They sounded like a warning. In the quiet that followed, I realized I'd been living in their shadows so long, I'd forgotten how to stand in my own light. Lauren showed up on a Saturday afternoon with a paper bag full of Thai food and that look she always wore when she knew I'd been pretending. "Let me guess," she said, kicking off her boots. "You've been eating takeout at your desk again, and your phone hasn't stopped buzzing." I smiled weakly and gestured toward the kitchen table. "It's fine. Work's just been crazy." "Work," she repeated flatly. "Or your parents." The truth slipped out before I could stop it. They needed help again. Lauren didn't answer right away. She unpacked the food, placed the containers neatly on the table, and finally looked at me. "How much this time?" "800. For the car." "Your car or theirs?" I hesitated. That was enough of an answer. Lauren sighed. "Emily, this isn't sustainable. You're not an ATM." I sat down across from her, picking at my noodles. "It's not like that. They just need a little help until things even out." Her eyebrows rose. "You've been saying that for nearly a decade. Things haven't evened out. They've learned that you'll fix it every time." I wanted to argue, but my throat tightened. "They're my parents. I can't just stop helping them." Lauren leaned forward, her voice soft but sharp. "Yes, you can. You just don't want to face what happens if you do." The silence between us stretched thick and heavy. Outside, snow had begun to fall, quiet flakes drifting past the window. I stared at them and said, "If I don't pay, they'll lose the house. I can't let that happen." She pushed her plate aside. "You're not saving them, Em. You're saving their comfort at the expense of your own life." I looked down at my hands. The skin around my nails was raw from nervous picking. They'd fall apart without me. Lauren exhaled, shaking her head. "That's the story they've sold you since you were a kid. That they're fragile, and you're the strong one. But all that means is they've made you responsible for everything they refuse to face." I didn't respond. The air smelled like lemongrass and guilt. After dinner, she wandered into the living room while I cleaned up the plates. When I came back, she was standing in front of my bookshelf, holding a small glass jar. "What's this?" she asked, shaking it gently. Coins clinked against the glass. "Oh," I said, quickly drying my hands on a towel. "That's my emergency fund." Lauren turned the jar in her hands, squinting at the black marker label. "Emergency fund?" she repeated slowly. "For you," I hesitated. "For them. You know, just in case something comes up. I put a little away each month so I don't get caught off guard." She stared at me, expression unreadable. Then she set the jar down on the coffee table and said quietly, "That's not an emergency fund, Emily. That's your guilt jar." The words landed like a slap. "My what?" "Your guilt jar," she repeated. "You're saving money so you can keep paying for their chaos. Every dollar in there isn't for emergencies. It's a down payment on your fear of disappointing them." "That's not fair," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm just being responsible." Lauren sat down, folding her legs under her. "Responsible for who you've been carrying them since you were barely an adult. You call it loyalty, but it's control. They've trained you to believe your worth comes from fixing what they break." I sank into the couch, staring at the jar. The coins inside glinted under the lamp. "They love me," I said softly. "They just need me." She looked at me gently but didn't flinch. No, they need your reliability. That's not the same thing as love. Something inside me cracked open just a little. I wanted to argue to defend them, but the words came out smaller than I expected. If I stopped helping, they'd hate me. Maybe, she said. But that's not love either. The silence that followed was unbearable. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock on the wall, the slow drip of melting snow outside. I thought of all the years I'd spent wiring money, the nights I'd stayed up transferring funds, instead of sleeping the way my parents' voices always softened right before asking for something. Lauren reached out and touched my hand. You deserve to live a life that isn't measured by their emergencies. Tears stung my eyes. You don't understand, Lauren. They gave me everything. She tilted her head. Did they? Or did they give everything to Rachel while you figured out the rest on your own? Her words sank like a stone into my chest. Images flashed behind my eyes. The pink bicycle, the graduation dinner I paid for, the checks I left under salt shakers. Every moment of quiet humiliation disguised as duty. I wiped my cheeks with the back of my hand. You make it sound so simple. It's not simple, she said. But it's necessary. We sat there for a long time without speaking. The snow outside thickened, blanketing the street in white. I watched it fall through the window, each flake landing silently, covering everything equally. For once, nothing was favored, nothing ignored. When Lauren finally stood to leave, she paused by the door. I'm not saying cut them off tonight. I'm saying think about what enough looks like. You've spent years asking how much you can give. Maybe it's time to ask how much you can keep. After she left, the apartment felt too quiet. The jar still sat on the table, half full, reflecting the lamplight. I picked it up, turned it in my hands. The glass was cool, the coins inside shifting softly. It didn't look like guilt, it looked like habit. I carried it to the shelf and set it back where it belonged. But I couldn't stop staring at it. When I went to bed, I dreamed I was back in my childhood room, the one with the ceiling fan that never stopped turning. The walls were lined with jars, hundreds of them, each labeled mortgage, car payment, utilities, emergency. My mother's voice echoed through the dark. You're strong, Emily. You can handle it. I woke up with my chest tight and the word guilt still ringing in my head. The next morning, the phone rang while I was making coffee. Mom's number. I stared at the screen for a long time before answering. Hi, sweetheart, she said brightly. We've got a little problem. The heater's gone out again and it's freezing in the house. My eyes flicked to the jar on the shelf. It seemed to glow under the morning light. Can you help us out just this once? She asked. We'll pay you back when the tax refund comes. I could almost hear Lauren's voice in my head. That's not an emergency fund. That's your guilt jar. My hand hovered over the laptop where I usually logged in to transfer money. I could feel the weight of every yes I'd ever said. But old reflexes die hard. I'll take care of it, I said quietly. When the call ended, I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee going cold, staring at the jar. I hated it. I hated that I couldn't stop myself. But under the hate was something else, awareness. Later that evening, Lauren texted me. How are you holding up? I typed and deleted 3 different answers before settling on the truth. I caved. But I think I finally see it now, she replied with a single line. That's the first step. That night I couldn't sleep. The city outside hummed with life, but my apartment was still wrapped in quiet. The jar on the shelf caught a sliver of streetlight through the blinds, glowing faintly like a warning or a promise. For years I'd thought of it as proof that I was responsible, that I cared. Now it looked like evidence of a crime I kept committing against myself. I got up, walked over to it, and pressed my fingertips against the glass. The coins inside were cold, the metal sharp against the surface. What would happen if I stopped? I whispered. The room didn't answer, but the question stayed heavy and real, hanging in the air long after I turned off the light. By the time December rolled around, Detroit had already settled into its winter rhythm, gray skies, frozen sidewalks, and breath that hung in the air like smoke. I was tired, the kind of tired that didn't go away after a weekend or a good night's sleep. The exhaustion lived somewhere deeper between my ribs like a stone I couldn't put down. At work, things were better than ever. Our fintech team had just launched a major platform update ahead of schedule, and my boss kept hinting about a promotion in the new year. My coworkers were planning the office holiday party, talking about bonuses and vacations. I smiled and nodded through it all, but inside I could already feel the next call coming, the one that would remind me that no matter how far I ran, I was still tethered to the house in Grand Rapids. It came that Friday evening. Mom's name lit up my phone as I was walking out of the office, the snow starting to fall in soft white flakes. I hesitated before answering, but guilt always wins before silence does. "Hi, honey," she said, her tone bright and casual. "We were thinking it might be nice if you hosted Christmas this year. Your apartment has such a lovely setup, and your father's been feeling a bit cramped in the house lately." I stared at the phone. "You want me to host Christmas?" "Yes, it'll be wonderful. You can cook, decorate, invite everyone. We'll help, of course." I knew what help meant. It meant they'd show up and criticize every decision I made. It meant I'd pay for everything. Still, I said yes. I always said yes. That night, I sat at my kitchen table making lists. Turkey, ham, vegetables, pies, good wine. I even wrote down candles and pine sprigs for the table. Somewhere between the cranberry sauce and the dinner rolls, I realized I'd written the word perfect 3 times in the margins. Lauren came with me to the grocery store that weekend. I pushed the cart while she crossed her arms, watching the total climb higher with every aisle. "You do realize none of them are going to appreciate this, right?" I forced a smile. "It's Christmas. Maybe this year will be different." She shook her head. "You keep saying that." I shrugged, pretending I didn't hear her. I spent over $400 that day. My bank account dipped lower than I wanted to see, but the thought of one peaceful holiday, just one, felt worth it. I wanted to believe that generosity could still fix things. 3 days before Christmas, Mom called again. Her voice was light, almost rehearsed. "We've been talking, sweetheart, and it might be better to do Christmas here at the house. Your father prefers being home for the holidays, and Aunt Barbara wants to see the place again." I froze, staring at the bags of groceries I'd already started preparing. "But Mom, I've been planning for weeks. I've bought everything." "Oh, don't worry. Just bring it all here. It'll be cozier." When the call ended, I sat at my kitchen counter in silence. I wanted to scream, to throw something to tell her no. Instead, I took a deep breath and told myself it was fine. I'd carry everything there. I'd make it work. That week at work, my boss congratulated me on my leadership and hinted again about the promotion. My team clapped. I smiled. Then my phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Can't wait for Christmas. I've got a surprise for everyone." The timing was cruel. On Christmas Eve morning, I loaded my car with trays of prepped food, wine bottles, wrapped in towels, and pies carefully covered in foil. Snow flurries swept across the highway as I drove toward Grand Rapids, gripping the wheel tightly. The closer I got, the heavier the air felt. Their house looked the same old siding, uneven lights strung along the porch. Dad's truck sat crooked in the driveway. I parked, carried the first load of bags up the steps, and knocked with my elbow. Dad opened the door after a long pause. He looked at the bags, then at me. "You're blocking the driveway. Rachel need to park there when she gets here. No Merry Christmas. No, let me help." Inside, Mom appeared in the doorway of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. "Well, look at you all dressed up. Some of us have been cooking since 6 this morning." I forced a smile. "I brought everything prepped. Just need the oven." "The oven's full," she said, turning back to the stove. "You know your father only likes my stuffing." I stood there with my carefully wrapped trays and felt the weight of it all, the money, the effort, the silence. Then I tied on an apron and started working anyway. Because that's what I did. I worked. The afternoon blurred into a series of small humiliations. Every comment a paper cut. "Don't overseason the potatoes." "Next time, keep the napkins plain." "That car of yours seems fancy for someone your age." Dad grabbed a beer from the fridge and muttered, "You should be saving, not throwing money at food." I wanted to remind him who paid for their mortgage, their car, their electricity, but the words stuck in my throat. When the doorbell rang, Mom's whole face lit up. "They're here," Aunt Barbara and Uncle George stepped in with smiles and gifts, followed by their daughter Natalie. The air warmed instantly, not because of the family, but because of Mom's sudden charm. "Oh, Barbara, you look wonderful. Come in, come in." I stood near the kitchen doorway, invisible again. Natalie came over to help, whispering, "Your table looks beautiful." The small kindness nearly undid me, but the peace didn't last. The front door opened again, this time with a burst of laughter that cut through the house. Rachel. She breezed in like she owned the place, new boots, designer coat, that unmistakable perfume that screamed money she didn't earn. Dad stood up immediately, grinning from ear to ear. "There's my star." Mom hugged her so tightly, it looked like she'd been waiting all day for that moment. Rachel tossed her hair back, flashing her perfect smile. "Sorry I'm late. Had to stop by a friend's to talk about my new business idea." The words hit like a bad joke I'd already heard before. Over dinner, Rachel dominated the conversation. She talked about her new fitness app that was going to revolutionize home workouts. Mom and Dad leaned in, nodding like she was unveiling a masterpiece. I stayed quiet as the plates passed around, my appetite gone. When she started explaining that she only needed $40,000 to launch properly, something inside me snapped. "What makes it different from the hundreds of other fitness apps already out there?" I asked. My tone was calm, curious. Rachel waved her fork dismissively. "You wouldn't understand. You're stuck in your little cubicle world." "I'm taking risks." Mom shot me a warning look. "Don't ruin Christmas, Emily. Let your sister share her dream." The room fell silent except for the clinking of silverware. Rachel smirked. "You're just jealous. You'll never do anything extraordinary." I felt heat rise to my face. Extraordinary, like the boutique, or the podcast, or the crypto group that lost everyone's money. Dad slammed his hand on the table. Enough, but it was too late. Years of swallowed silence came spilling out. For 8 years I've been paying for this house, $800 a month for the mortgage, $400 for utilities, $600 for your car plus insurance, phones, internet, all of it, $30,000 a year. $250,000, and you still treat me like I don't belong. Every fork froze. Aunt Barbara gasped. Natalie looked at me, eyes wide. Mom's face drained of color. "You think paying bills makes you family?" Dad's voice thundered. "Get out. You're not welcome here." The words rang in my ears, sharp and final. Mom leaned forward, her voice low and venom-sweet. "You're just jealous of your sister." Something inside me broke, and for once it didn't hurt. I stood, pushed my chair back slowly, and said, "Then let her pay the $12,800. The silence that followed was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. Rachel's face turned red, her mouth opening and closing with no words. Aunt Barbara whispered my name, but I didn't stop. I laid my napkin on the table, straightened my coat, and said, "I'm done pretending." Dad shouted something behind me as I walked down the hall, but his voice sounded far away. Natalie caught up to me near the door, her eyes glassy. "Don't let them make you feel small," she whispered. I managed a weak smile. "I won't." Outside, the cold hit me like a baptism. I stood there for a long time, staring at the snow swirling under the streetlights, the sound of muffled shouting still leaking from the house behind me. Then I walked to my car, started the engine, and drove. The highway stretched ahead, dark and endless. My reflection in the window looked calm, almost unfamiliar. I whispered the words again just to hear them out loud. "Then let her pay the $12,800. And for the first time in my life, the silence that followed felt like peace. The sound of my tires on the wet road was the only thing keeping me grounded. Snow had started to fall again, thin white lines streaking across the windshield as the wipers struggled to keep up. I kept my eyes fixed on the highway ahead, the yellow lines blurring through tears I didn't remember starting. The heater hummed softly, fogging the corners of the glass, and for the first time in years I had nowhere to go, no one waiting, no reason to turn back. The words from the dinner table echoed like ghosts in my head. Get out! You're not family! You're just jealous! Each one hit harder than the last until they stopped sounding like my parents and started sounding like a chorus I'd been hearing my whole life. I didn't know how long I drove. Maybe an hour, maybe more. The streets outside Detroit were nearly empty, the city lights fading behind me as I followed the long curve of the river road. When my hands began to shake too much to steer, I pulled over into a small park lot overlooking the water. The river was half frozen, a sheet of silver under the dark sky. I turned off the engine. The silence hit like a crash. At first, I just sat there, breathing, not thinking. The world outside looked unreal, like a snow globe that someone had forgotten to shake. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked just as hollow, red eyes, hair-tangled cheeks, streaked with salt and mascara. Then the shaking started. Not from the cold, but from everything I'd held back. The years of working, giving, paying, apologizing, trying. I pressed my palms to the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white and whispered to no one I paid for everything. And it still wasn't enough. The words cracked something open inside me. Tears came hard and fast. I let them. For once, I didn't try to hide them or swallow them down. I cried until my chest hurt, until my throat burned. Then I screamed. A raw, wordless sound that tore through the small space of the car, fogging the windows, echoing back at me. When the last of it drained out, I felt empty, like the part of me that used to keep the peace had finally died. I must have sat there for another hour watching snow pile up on the hood until a knock on the window made me flinch. It was Lauren. Her face was pale from the cold, framed by the falling snow, her breath fogging against the glass. I rolled the window down just enough for her voice to reach me. I tracked your phone, she said, her voice trembling. You didn't answer my calls. I got scared. I blinked, confused. How did you even know you texted me before dinner? She said softly. I knew something would happen. She opened the passenger door and climbed in without waiting for permission, rubbing her hands together. Jesus, it's freezing. Turn the heat on. I did. The car filled with the faint hum of the vents, the air slowly warming between us. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Lauren glanced at me, eyes scanning my face. So, do I ask what happened, or do I just sit here until you're ready? I gave a broken laugh. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Try me. So I did. I told her everything. The dinner, the app, the insults, the shouting. The way Dad's fist hit the table, the way Mom leaned in and whispered those words like poison, the way Rachel smirked as if she'd won. And finally, what I said before I left. When I got to the part about the $12,800, Lauren's eyes widened. You said that, in front of everyone. Every single one of them, I said quietly. Aunt Barbara, Uncle George, Natalie. They all heard it. Lauren exhaled, a small, incredulous smile forming on her lips. Good. It's about time someone told them the truth. I shook my head. It didn't feel good. It just felt empty. Like I'd been waiting my whole life to say something that should have never needed saying. Lauren reached over, placing a hand on my arm. That's not emptiness, Em. That's space. You finally made room for yourself. I stared out at the river, the surface frozen and still. They hate me now. They never loved you the way you deserved, she said simply. The words hit harder than I expected. I turned toward her, my voice barely a whisper. They're still my parents. Lauren nodded. And that doesn't mean they get to destroy you. For a while, the only sound was the hum of the car and the faint whisper of wind outside. Then she leaned forward, pulling my laptop from the back seat. You said you've been paying everything right. The mortgage, the cars, the insurance. I nodded, wiping my eyes. Yeah, all of it. She opened it and set it on the console between us. The glow of the screen lit our faces. Then show me. Show me exactly what you've done. I hesitated, but something about her tone made me obey. I opened my banking app, scrolling through the transactions. Mortgage, utilities, car payments, year after year, all in my name. Lauren's jaw tightened as she watched. "Jesus, Emily," she said quietly. "This isn't help. This is financial slavery." I laughed weakly. "Don't sugarcoat it. Don't joke about it," she snapped, then softened. "You've been carrying 3 adults on your back. They let you. They expected you to." The cursor blinked in the corner of the screen. I opened a spreadsheet and started typing every expense every year. By the time I finished, my hands were trembling. 30,000 a year, Lauren murmured, reading the total. "For 8 years. That's $250,000, I said. We both stared at the number. "That's your house," she whispered. "Your future. Your life." I leaned back in my seat, the glow of the laptop reflecting in my tired eyes. "It's my proof." Lauren tilted her head. "Proof of what? That I wasn't crazy," I said. "That all those years I thought I was being dramatic or selfish for feeling used, I wasn't. This is it. It's right here. I gave them everything and they still told me to get out." She was quiet for a long time before saying, "So what?" Now, I looked down at my hands. They were steady for the first time all night. Now I stop. Lauren smiled faintly. "You mean it?" I nodded. "I can't save them. I can't make them love me. All I can do is stop bleeding for people who don't care if I'm alive or not." Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. "You have no idea how proud I am of you." The snow outside was slowing now, flakes drifting lazily past the windshield. For the first time, I could see the faint glow of dawn on the horizon. I took a deep breath. Tomorrow, I'm cutting everything. The payments, the accounts, all of it. Lauren looked at me carefully. "Are you sure?" "Yes." She nodded once as if sealing a pact. "Then I'll sit right here until you fall asleep. You're not doing this night alone." I wanted to argue, but my body was already giving in. The exhaustion came back heavier this time, but it didn't hurt. It felt like release. By the time I closed my eyes, Lauren had reclined her seat, the heater humming softly, the world outside, painted in the first pale light of morning. Before sleep took me, I whispered into the dim air, "They said paying bills doesn't make you family." Lauren's voice came quietly through the dark. "Good. Then stop paying to belong to people who never deserved you." The last thing I remember was the sound of the river cracking under the thawing ice. Something breaking, something beginning. When I woke up hours later, the storm had stopped. The sky was pale blue, streaked with sunlight. Lauren was asleep in the passenger seat, her hand resting lightly on the open laptop, the spreadsheet still glowing. I watched her for a long time, the numbers on the screen, shimmering like truth, finally set free. Then I started the car. For once, the road ahead didn't look endless. It looked open. The morning light was thin and gray when I woke. My neck ached from sleeping in the car, my breath fogging the windshield as I stirred. The river was still outside, half frozen, glinting beneath a soft layer of snow. For a second, I forgot where I was. Then I saw the laptop still open on the console beside me, the spreadsheet glowing faintly with that impossible number at the bottom, $243,600. The number didn't shock me anymore. It sat there calm and final, like a gravestone. Lauren was still asleep in the passenger seat, her coat pulled tight, head resting against the window. She looked peaceful, the way people look when they're not carrying the world on their backs. I envied that ease. I'd forgotten what it felt like to wake up without guilt waiting beside me. When she stirred, I smiled weakly. "You really stayed all night." She rubbed her eyes, yawning. "Of course I did. I told you you weren't doing this alone." Her voice was rough but kind, the same tone she used when we crammed for finals years ago, and she'd catch me rewriting notes at 3 in the morning. Back then, my exhaustion had come from ambition. Now it came from survival. I turned the ignition just long enough to warm the car. The heater hummed to life, filling the silence. We sat there for a while, watching the steam curl from our breath, not needing to speak. Finally, I said quietly, "I'm done, Laure. For real this time. She looked at me, searching for hesitation, and when she didn't find any, she nodded. Then start with one thing. Just one. Don't think about all of it yet. I took a deep breath. The air felt heavier than it should have. Okay. By the time we got back to my apartment, the sun was climbing above the skyline, turning the snow on the rooftops gold. I brewed coffee, still half in autopilot, while Lauren sat on my couch, legs tucked under her like she'd done 100 times before. Let's do this, she said, taking the mug I handed her. I opened the laptop again, the glow filling the room. One by one, I pulled up every account I had managed for my parents. My heart thudded like a drum, steady and low. Mortgage, utilities, insurance, car payments, all of it tied to me. My money. My name. The first one was the hardest. I opened the mortgage portal, scrolled to the automatic payment schedule, and hovered over the cancel button. My hand shook. For a moment, I saw Dad's face, the look of disappointment, the frown that always came when he called me ungrateful. Lauren's voice broke through the memory. Click it. I pressed the button. The screen flashed, confirming cancellation. It felt like breathing after years underwater. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but the feeling wasn't sadness. It was something cleaner, like the ache that comes after a long run when you realize you've finally stopped running for someone else. Next, Lauren said softly. Utilities, electric, gas, water. Each cancellation came easier. My hands steadied, my breathing slowed. Every "are you sure" confirmation felt less like a warning and more like permission. When I reached the family phone plan, I laughed for the first time that day. This one's going to sting, I said. Lauren grinned. Good. I opened the list of devices, 5 in total. Mine at the top, followed by Mom's, Dad's, Rachel's, and a tablet I didn't even know existed. I selected them one by one, hitting remove. The message popped up. These lines will be deactivated in 72 hours unless new payment information is provided. Guess Christmas came early, Lauren murmured. Next came the cars, both loans under my name. I remembered the day Dad had handed Rachel her keys, saying proudly, "Your sister just helped you start your future." I called the lender, my voice steady, as I explained that the payments should no longer be drawn from my account. The representative confirmed politely and said paperwork would arrive within the week. When I hung up, I let out a long, trembling breath. That's it, I whispered. That's all of them. Lauren shook her head. No, one more. I frowned. What? She nodded toward the laptop. The security system. The memory hit instantly last winter after a neighbor's break-in. I'd spent nearly $1,000 installing cameras and smart locks for their safety. I'd even paid for the subscription that sent alerts straight to my phone. Do it, Lauren said. I logged in. The dashboard blinked to life, tiny green icons, showing the living room, the front porch, the kitchen. My parents' house looked warm and familiar. Christmas lights still glowing on the porch, the tree visible through the front window. I hovered over the deactivate button. My stomach tightened. Emily, Lauren said softly, they've lived off your light long enough. I clicked. The icons dimmed one by one, fading to gray. The house went dark. I stared at the blank screen, my reflection faint against it. It's done. Lauren smiled, eyes glistening. You did it. For a moment, I just sat there staring at nothing. The silence in my apartment felt different now, not empty but earned. The air felt clearer, lighter. She leaned back on the couch, stretching. How does it feel? I thought about it. The answer wasn't dramatic or loud. It was simple. Quiet. We spent the rest of the morning talking about anything but family. Movies, work, vacations we might actually take someday. For the first time in years, my life didn't feel like something I was managing for someone else. It felt like it belonged to me. When Lauren finally left that afternoon, she hugged me tightly. Promise me something, she said. What? When they call, and they will, you don't answer. You don't owe them explanations. I nodded. I promise. After she left, I made tea and sat by the window. Outside, the snow had stopped. The streets below shimmered with pale sunlight. For hours I didn't move. I just watched the city breathe. That night I slept for 10 straight hours, the deepest sleep I'd had in years. When I woke, the first thing I noticed was the quiet. The second was my phone. 43 missed calls, 68 unread texts. I stared at the screen. The storm had arrived. Mom's voicemails came first. "What's going on, Emily? The power's out. The heat isn't working. You need to fix this right now." Then Dad's voice, angry and cold. "This is elder abuse, Emily. You think you can humiliate us, you'll regret this." Then Rachel, "You've ruined everything. You're pathetic. Fix it." And then the final one, Mom again, voice trembling. "Your father's in the hospital. He had chest pains. If anything happens to him, it's on you." I froze. My hands started to shake. For a second, the guilt came flooding back, raw and instinctive. I almost reached for my keys. Then another message buzzed through, a text from Natalie. "Don't believe them. No one's in the hospital. The cops are at the house. They called them. They're trying to scare you." I let out a slow, shaking breath. My vision blurred as relief mixed with disbelief. I opened the security feed backup I'd saved before shutting it all down. The screen flickered to life, showing the living room. 2 officers stood there speaking calmly with my parents, while Rachel paced behind them. Dad's face was red. Mom's hands were clasped dramatically to her chest. No one looked sick, just cornered. I sat back, staring at the frozen image. The people I had spent my entire adulthood protecting looked small for the first time. Fragile not because of struggle, but because the truth had finally caught up with them. My phone buzzed again. Another voicemail. Another plea. I deleted them all. Outside, the snow started to fall again, soft and slow. I stood by the window, the city lights flickering below. For years I'd built my life around keeping theirs from collapsing. But tonight, the collapse wasn't mine to fix. I poured another cup of tea and whispered into the empty room. "You were right, Lauren." The quiet answered back, warm and certain. It wasn't revenge. It was freedom. The next morning, light crept through my blinds, sharp and white against the gray of my apartment. My phone was still on the nightstand, vibrating every few minutes like it had a heartbeat of its own. I didn't reach for it right away. I sat up slowly, wrapped the blanket tighter around my shoulders, and stared at the pale morning outside. Detroit was quiet. The snow muffled everything. The traffic, the world, even the noise inside my head. When I finally picked up the phone, the screen glared back, 67 missed calls, 42 unread texts, 11 voicemails, all from the same 3 names. Mom, Dad, Rachel. For years, I dropped everything to answer them. Every call was an emergency. Every text a guilt trip wrapped in affection. But this morning, the sight didn't make my stomach twist. It made me smile. Just a small one, but real. I opened one voicemail, Mom's voice coming through in sharp bursts. "The heat's still out. The pipes are freezing. We can't even make coffee, Emily. You need to fix this right now." Next came Dad, his tone hard as metal. "You've gone too far. You think you can cut us off. We raised you. You owe us. I'll call the police if you don't fix this." Then Rachel's shrill complaint. "You ruined Christmas. Do you realize what you've done? I was supposed to have an investor meeting today, and now I can't even leave the house because the car's gone. You're pathetic." I set the phone down on the counter and poured myself coffee. My hands didn't shake. Halfway through my cup, another voicemail came in. Mom again, voice trembling. "Your father's at the hospital. He had chest pains. The stress from what you did, it's too much for him. If anything happens, it's on you." The guilt hit like a reflex, automatic and immediate. My throat tightened. For one terrifying second, I thought about grabbing my coat and driving straight to Grand Rapids. But then the phone buzzed again, a text from Natalie. "Don't believe them. No one's in the hospital. The police are there. They told your parents this is a civil matter. Everyone's fine, just embarrassed." The breath I hadn't realized I was holding escaped in a shaky laugh. I leaned back against the counter and stared at the message until it blurred. Embarrassed. That word tasted better than any revenge I could have imagined. I grabbed my laptop from the table and opened the last saved feed from the house cameras, the ones I'd shut down the night before. The screen flickered to life, showing a frozen snapshot of their living room. 2 officers stood near the doorway, arms crossed. Mom was on the couch, one hand to her forehead, playing the victim. Dad paced across the rug, shouting, pointing at the unplugged router like it was a bomb I'd planted. Rachel hovered near the Christmas tree, scrolling her phone furiously, lips pressed in a pout. No one was sick. No one was suffering. They were just exposed. I watched for a few seconds longer, then closed the laptop and exhaled. The quiet that followed was clean, pure. By noon, the storm had calmed. The snow outside had turned to slush, and the city was waking up again. I brewed another pot of coffee, answered an email from my boss, and realized something strange. I didn't feel panicked. I didn't feel guilty. My phone rang again. Mom's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring out. Then again, and again. By the 3rd call, I finally picked up, not to answer, but to listen. Emily, she started, her voice soft now, almost gentle. We didn't mean to upset you. But you can't just leave us like this, the mortgage company called. They said the payment was canceled. What are we supposed to do? Please come over and talk. We can fix this as a family. Family. That word again. I almost laughed. I ended the call before she could say more. For years I'd believed that family meant obligation. That love was proved through sacrifice. But the past 24 hours had taught me the simplest truth: real love doesn't keep score, and theirs always had. That afternoon, the phone rang again. This time, it wasn't them. Emily. The voice was deep, male, professional. Yes, this is Officer Donnelly from the Grand Rapids Police Department. Your parents filed a report claiming financial exploitation. I just wanted to confirm a few details. My pulse stayed steady. Go ahead. He asked about the accounts, the payments, the ownership.